Julie, if you'll go ahead and hit the record button. Thank you.
I just did.
Excellent, I see that. So we're going to go over Victim Service Unit roles, VOCA overview, grant requirements, VOCA compensation overview, VOCA allowable expenses, unallowable expenses, briefly touch on monitoring and technical assistance, give you some resources and our contact information. The Victim Services Unit consists of Erica Pond. She's our Victim Services Manager. She oversees the main unit for victim services, deals directly with OVC and OJP. She handles the high-level items and oversees the victim service programs. Julie Linda Smith is also with us. She oversees the VOCA programs, and I'll let her introduce herself for just a second. Julie?
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to provide you this training. Feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like in the chat panel. If you don't want to ask it to everyone, you can send it to the organizers, and then we'll be able to ask it at the questions section. I've been with DCFS for almost a year now, and it's been great working with you guys and meeting all of you and seeing the great work that's being done. And I'm excited that we have a few new agencies joining for the VOCA State Fiscal Year 22 funding. All right, back to you, Jean.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. We're glad to have you as well. I'm Jean Booth. I'm the Grants and Projects Analyst for DCFS Victim Service Unit. I've been with DCFS for about 3 years now, mostly focusing on the Victim Service Awards. I am always available to answer questions and greatly encourage open communication with everybody. So if you haven't met me before, we will get to know each other very well this next coming year. Tracy Gross is our Management Analyst, and she processes our requests for reimbursements. She is a wonderful asset to have. She does all the RFRs that come in, which are quite a few, and she's just an amazing person to work with. So we're really excited for her. And then Adon Aguilera, he is also new to our agency, or not to our agency, to our department. He is the Confidential Address Program Officer, and he is another amazing contact if you're interested in learning more about the Confidential Address Program. So the first thing we'd like to say is congratulations on receiving VOCA SFY22 funding. $18 million was awarded for State Fiscal Year 22. This is down from $22 million that was awarded this particular year. 67 programs are funded, with $1 million of that funding going to 15 innovative programs across the state. Our funding by region, you can see the breakdown. Most of it went to Clark County because that's where most of our population is. The next largest chunk went to Washoe County, then to rurals, and statewide received $540,000. Funding by region in a different graph, I guess, you can see that we did have quite a bit of requested that we weren't able to fund just because we had a lot more requests than we had money to fund with. And then our funding priority areas, you can see the breakdown. We do child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, underserved, other victims of crime, and innovative. So you can see how that breaks down, and that we try to maintain a good 10% or more in the 4 main categories that we serve for victims. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the elephant in the room, the VOCA audit. As many of you know, DCFS received a high-risk status during our last federal VOCA audit. While we've worked extremely hard with OJP and OVC to rectify all the findings and remove our high-risk status, this is still in process. What does this mean for you? Simply put, this means that while your awards are effective, occasionally payments may be delayed as funds are released from OVC. We will do our utmost to maintain communication and continue to try to fix this problem, as DCFS is deeply concerned about the current VOCA funding situation and its impact on our subrecipients. VOCA overview. Let's talk a little bit about an overview on VOCA funding. It's administered by the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, OJP, Office of Victims of Crime, OVC. It was established in 1984 when OVC created the Crime Victims Fund, which provides funds to states for victims assistance and compensation programs that offer support and services to those affected by violent crime. This fund is directly from crime. It's not tax funded. It's directly from. Oh goodness, I cannot talk today. It's not tax funded, so it's regulated a little bit differently than all tax-funded grants from the federal office. It's regulated by the DOJ Grants Financial Guide, 2 CFR 200, the Federal Register, and the State of Nevada Grant Instructions and Requirement, or GERS. The intent of VOCA funding, VOCA supports the provision of services to victims of crime, which is defined as a person who has suffered physical, sexual, financial, or emotional harm as a result of the commission of a crime throughout the nation. These services are defined as those efforts that respond to the emotional and physical needs of crime victims, assist primary and secondary victims of crime to stabilize their lives after a victimization, assist victims to understand and participate in the criminal justice system, and to provide victims of crime with a measure of safety and security. One thing that we want to make sure that everybody knows is that VOCA clients cannot be charged for VOCA services. You're receiving VOCA funding so that the clients don't have to pay for the services and they can overcome their victimization. So VOCA clients cannot be charged for VOCA services. Are there any questions over anything that we've talked about so far?
I haven't seen any come through the chat.
Okay,
but
perfect.
while people are thinking, they can type at any time. And please remember, if you haven't done so already, sign in with your name and agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to talk about the requirements for DCFS and VOCA subrecipients. The first requirement is that all DCFS-funded agencies are registered with Nevada 211. You go to Nevada 211's contact page to get your agency registered for this site if you haven't already. This site is managed by Money Marketing, so if you receive emails from them, it isn't spam. Just to keep aware of that information. If you're already registered with Nevada 211, it's a good practice to review your information and update it if necessary yearly. You can send us a screenshot of the page on the 211 website or forward us the email from 211 that states that you've updated or registered your agency. VOCA is probably one of the most strict grants that you'll work with. There are a lot of rules and regulations regarding VOCA funding, and it is in your agency's best interest to maintain open communication with us, the Victim Services team, to make sure that you're within grant compliance. We're here to help you succeed and encourage any questions you may have, no matter how trivial you may think that they are. With that said, let's go over some of the basic requirements for VOCA. If you have questions on any of these requirements, please ask them in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end of this section. Subrecipients must maintain compliance with DCFS grant requirements. These requirements are found in the VOCA NOSA and in the GERS, which we went over in an additional training and are occasionally updated via emails and/or trainings as we are continually receiving feedback and guidance from the feds on what their expectations are. Any changes that occur in the middle of a funding cycle will be implemented immediately and not retroactive. Compliance with the federal rule, which includes maintaining programmatic and financial records that fully disclose the amount and disposition of VOCA funds received. This includes financial documentation for disbursements, daily time and attendance records, specifying the time devoted to allowable VOCA services, client files, cost allocations, job descriptions, contracts for services, and any other record which facilitate an effective audit if deemed necessary by the feds. Subrecipients must maintain an active DUNS number and be in compliance with SAM.gov to receive any federal funding. That information will be provided in this slide. This information must be active and continue to remain so for payments to be allowed to process per federal guidance. It's a responsibility for all subrecipients to maintain compliance with civil rights information. We will discuss this in depth on the next slide. Subrecipients are required to meet statutorily required civil rights statistics on victims served by race, national origin, sex, age, and disability, and permit reasonable access to its books, documents, papers, and records to determine whether the subrecipient is in compliance with applicable civil rights laws. I'll go ahead and give you a second to let you read through this slide. Okay, VOCA requirements. Service must be voluntary and no conditions can be imposed on the receipt of services. Subrecipients may not apply inappropriate screening mechanisms such as criminal background checks or sobriety requirements for victims to obtain services. This includes shelter services. Income eligibility standards may not be applied to individuals receiving assistance or services. No person shall, on the ground of actual or perceived gender, including gender identity, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity funded in whole or in part through VOCA. Do you have any questions over what we've talked about so far?
Yes, Jean, we have two questions that came in. The first one I'll ask and then I'll answer it.
Okay.
We received a Medicaid survey. If we are not able to charge, why are we exploring that option? So Medicaid does not cost any of its participants. So any individual receiving Nevada Medicaid gets the Medicaid for free, and they also get the services, and you cannot charge a copay to any Medicaid subrecipient. So if there's individual receiving Medicaid, they go to the doctor, there can't be a copay. Medicare, which is different than Medicaid, does sometimes have a copay depending on the program. The reason we're looking at Medicaid is because as VOCA funding from the feds decreases, we're looking at other ways to make sure all the services are still being provided in this state. Hopefully that answers the question. Please do follow up in the chat if you have any on that. And then the next one is, where can I find the recorded trainings on the DCFS website? And I posted in the chat, the recordings are not posted yet, but Jean or myself will send out an email once they are posted with the link and where you can find them. Sometimes it takes us a little bit to get it up on the website. And then we have one more. The slides weren't attached to my email, and then they're asking for a copy. So yes, if you didn't have the slides attached, please just email Jean or myself or post in the chat, either privately to us or in general, and we will go ahead and send you a copy of the slides. That's all the questions we have so far, Jean.
Perfect. Are there any other questions that have come up while Julie was chatting? Okay, we will move on to the next one. So VOCA has 3 grant-specific requirements that must be met and will be tracked through the life of the award. The first is that subrecipients must assist VOCA clients in applying for the VOCA compensation benefits if available, or if applicable, I'm sorry. VOCA compensation provides immediate financial assistance to qualified victims of violent crimes that occur in Nevada. The VOCA compensation website is located on the bottom of this slide. It's voc.nv.gov. It'll also be in your resources section on this PowerPoint. Victims of Crime Program, or VOCA Comp, has strict guidelines for applicant eligibility. These are that the crime must be reported to the police, Child Protective Services, or other law enforcement agency within 5 days of the crime, unless physically or mentally unable to do so. The victims cannot have participated in or been involved in committing the crime. What this means is that if there were people who did a B&E, like a breaking and entering, and somebody got injured doing the B&E, they are not considered a victim of that because they were committing the B&E. This doesn't necessarily apply to victims of sexual assault or sexual trafficking, because they're not necessarily participating in the crime because they are the victim of being trafficked. We had a question on that last time, so I wanted to make sure that that was clarified this time. Victims must cooperate with law enforcement during the investigation and prosecution of the crime. Applicants must cooperate with VOCA Comp. Application must be submitted to VOCA Comp within 2 years of the crime or within a reasonable time where the victim is unable to apply within 2 years. Minor victims have until age 21 to file an application. There are many services that VOCA compensation can assist with. The information here is an example on what VOCA Comp can help with, and just keep in mind that claims cannot exceed $35,000. Further questions and assistance with VOCA compensation can be addressed by going to voc.nv.gov. That information is on this slide. If you'd like more information or think that your agency might be a good provider for compensation services, please contact Tracy Spears at tspears.ccinv.com. Her information is also on this slide. Are there any questions over VOCA compensation information?
None came in through the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Subrecipients must utilize volunteers for services. Volunteer services must be documented with the activity-based time cards that are signed by the volunteer and the person overseeing them. For volunteer evaluation, what they're saving your agency, documentation showing this must be provided, and this is for match only. So if you're just documenting your volunteer usage to show that VOCA is using volunteers, then you don't need to provide this valuation. If you're wanting to use your volunteers as match, which is a totally allowable cost, then you will have to provide this volunteer valuation. All you have to do is do a simple Google search and find the median income level for this position in this area. So if you have a volunteer doing janitorial services in like Ely, Nevada, you're going to go ahead and look up janitorial services for Ely, Nevada, and whatever that median income level is, that is what you can use as that valuation. So you'd have to provide that screenshot. If you already had an employee who was a janitor and you have a volunteer that's a janitor, you can use that employee equivalent valuation. You just have to show that documentation. Or you can use the federally approved volunteer valuation of $27.20 an hour. It's totally up to you what valuation you want to use. You just have to notify us what that valuation looks like so that we know what you're using and how to match properly. A match requirement for VOCA is subrecipients must meet 20% match of the total VOCA award. What this looks like is different than what most people think it is. It's the match formula is the number awarded from DCFS, which is what was in your letter of intent, divided by 80%, which is your total VOCA award. You multiply that total VOCA award by 20%, and that is what your match is due. So for example, if you received $100,000 from us, you divide that by 80%, which is 125, which is your total award. That 125 gets multiplied by 20%, and $25,000 is the total match due for that particular VOCA award. Your total match due was listed on your notice of intent fund letter and will be included in your NOSA. If you have questions on this match formula, or if you're not sure that it was done correctly, please go ahead and contact myself or Julie, and we can go ahead and walk you through this. What can be used as match? Volunteer time related to the program. You must provide a time card and volunteer evaluation. Marriage license funding can be utilized to this award as long as it is not utilized for any other award. Personnel or other programmatic costs that are not federally funded, which means they're paid through general funds, private funds, or state funding. Match cannot be used with federal funding. I'm going to say that one more time. Match cannot be used with federal funding. Prorated cost of real value of owned property. For example, say you own the building or space that your office or shelter is in, the cost someone would pay if that space was rented out would be what you can utilize for match. This must be cost allocated for the space that is used for victim service use. For some reason, you don't think that your agency will meet the 20% VOCA match requirement, you have an opportunity to submit a match waiver request. Match waivers are available by request for any agency receiving VOCA funding. If your agency has determined that match may not be met this fiscal year in its entirety, please contact us. My contact information is on the slide for your convenience. Also on this slide is an example of the match waiver request. If you think that you need a match waiver, if you could turn that information in with your NOSA information, that would be preferable. If you're not sure and you want to try to do match, then that's fine as well. Just throughout this year, make sure that you're in communication with us on whether or not you think your agency can provide the match information. Confidentiality requirements. Subrecipients are prohibited from the following: disclosing any personally identifying information collected in connection with services requested through subrecipients programs, revealing any personally identifying information without informed, written, reasonably time-limited consent by the person about whom the information is sought, and requiring an adult, youth, or child victim of a family, domestic, or dating violence to provide a consent to release his or her personally identifying information as a condition of eligibility for the services provided by a subrecipient. Confidentiality rules. Please take a minute to familiarize yourself with 28 CFR 94-115. This describes the non-disclosure and confidentiality rules. It's up to your agency to review these and follow them. What can be shared with the state? Occasionally, there will be instances where we need to review documents that may have identifying information. Any identifying information would need to be eliminated from documentation that is shared with our office to continue to maintain client confidentiality. I'll give you a second to just look at this. If you have questions about the confidentiality, please contact our office or see 28 CFR 94-15. Confidentiality exceptions would be nothing in the VOCA confidentiality provisions prohibits compliance with legally mandated reporting of abuse or neglect. Are there any questions on volunteers, match, or confidentiality?
Yes, team, we have quite a few questions that came in. So I'll start with how recent does victimization need to be to qualify for VOCA support?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, how recent does the victimization need to be qualify for VOCA support?
So it would be preferred to have it as recent as possible, but if somebody's coming in as an adult that experienced childhood victimization, there are allowabilities for that in VOCA services. If they received domestic violence 6 years ago, they've left the perpetrator, they've moved on with their life and they're seeking therapy, we can help with the therapy, but we can't necessarily do relocation or other services. In situations where you're not sure if they would be VOCA eligible, my best suggestion would be to contact our office and we can see if there's an area or what and how much VOCA can help with that particular client.
Okay, the next question is, so we can use $27 for all volunteers if we choose, no matter what position they are volunteering for?
Yes, that is the federal volunteer evaluation. So if you choose to use that federal volunteer rate, just let us know and you can use that rate.
Also, would the $27 have to be used for all positions?
No. If you decide to use that rate for one position, but use a different rate for another position, you just have to provide the backup documentation showing us what rate you're going to use and why.
And then the last one we have is, where can we locate the federal volunteer evaluation amount and which agency sets it?
The feds set it. I don't know which agency offhand sets that rate. You can just do a quick Google search and find it. I want to say that we have it in our resources. If not, I will go ahead and add that in our email. But it is just a real quick federal volunteer evaluation search on Google.
Thanks, Jean. That's all the questions we have so far.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we're going to talk about VOCA allowable services. This is an example of allowable expenses with VOCA. Immediate shelter and related supportive services, safety planning, counseling, peer support groups, information and referrals, training and technical assistance, public awareness and campaigns, culturally and linguistically appropriate services, services for children exposed to family violence, domestic violence, or dating violence, advocacy, case management, legal and medical advocacy, assistance in securing other resources, transportation, childcare, job training and employment services, financial planning, literacy services, and parenting and education services. Allowable expenses, these must be in your approved budget and in your NOSA. So for everybody who is turned on this training and is doing something else, please pay attention to this slide. Allowable expenses must be in your approved budget and in your NOSA. If they're not, you must get approval from GMU staff prior to spending the money and complete a subaward amendment. If you're unsure if cost is allowable, please contact our staff. Our information is provided here, and we're available anytime, Monday through Friday, to assist you with questions that you may have. We'll go over what kinds of things should go in each category in a few minutes. Reasonable VOCA charges. Reasonable is defined as those costs that a prudent person would have incurred under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision to incur the cost was made. For example, if you have a victim looking for emergent shelter and all shelter services are occupied, your next step would be to place that victim in a safe hotel or motel room for the night, not the penthouse suite in the Peppermill or Caesar's Palace. You want to always keep in mind what would safety and prudency first. If you're unsure if an item will be approved due to the cost, please contact GMU Victim Services and explain the situation. Generally, we can come up with a reasonable alternative or understand why you've made the decision that you've made, but please make sure that all costs that you incur with VOCA funding is reasonable and safe. Cost allocation is the process of identifying, aggregating, and assigning costs. These are expenses benefiting more than one funding source or program and are shared costs to be allocated properly. Cost allocation is used for financial reporting purposes, to spread costs among other departments or items. Some examples of things that are cost allocated are supplies, rent, utilities, shelter, services, clients, department, staff, and other things that are shared amongst multiple funding sources. Cost allocation is discussed in further detail in our RFR training. Do not charge expenses to a particular funding source just because more funds are available from that source. You need to be able to cost allocate your sources of funding. Okay, budget category approved expenses. In personnel, staff dedicated to direct VOCA services. These staff must have a signed activity-based time card that shows time spent on VOCA services or a signed attestation by the employee and supervisor stating that 100% of the hours are for VOCA services. Either one must be provided to our agency so that we have either the signed attestation on record or you have the activity-based time card that cost allocates their time amongst funding sources. For travel and training, mileage to transport victims, this does not include mileage from the employee's home to or from work. Mileage must have a mileage log with total mileage listed. It cannot exceed the GSA rate, which is at gsa.gov, and mileage must be for victim services. The next thing that can be covered in travel and training are training expenses. These must be pre-approved and on your budget narrative by our staff. All training must be for staff and related to victim services. All training and travel associated with this training cost will be reimbursed once the training is completed. A summary of the training and associated travel must be included with your reimbursement request. For examples, please contact our office or review the RFR training. For operating, these are just some examples of what can be included in operating costs. These costs must be on your budget in your NOSA and cost allocated across all victim service funding. These are costs that are directly related to direct victim services. I'll give you a second to kind of look at those examples. But these are what should be on your budget so that we can go ahead and reimburse them when you do your RFRs. Equipment. These must be pre-approved and on your budget narrative. These include electronics of all types. Some examples of equipment are cell phones, computers, anything, tablets, braille equipment, SFY, TTD machines, furnaces for shelter, or any item that is purchased or leased costs $5,000 or more. Any equipment purchases must be pre-approved by your GPA. This includes electronics of all types, like computers or cell phones or tablets. For detailed information about equipment, reference the GERS 2221 or reach out to myself or Julie. Your agency must keep a log of all equipment purchased with grant funds and have all equipment available for review during the subrecipient monitoring. This log must have a list of equipment, the date purchased, funding source, cost, serial number, physical location, use and condition, last date inventoried, and the ultimate disposition of this equipment. Computers, including cell phones, should be labeled with property of VOCA and your grant number. That grant number was told will be on your NOSA, and we talked about that during the NOSA training. You can also ask our agency, either myself or Julie, what your grant number is if you're not sure where to find that. For detailed information, reference GERS 2221 or reach out to myself or Julie. And we're happy to help you with any of this. For contracts or consultants, per VOCA guidelines, VOCA funds generally should not be used to support contract services. At times, however, it may be necessary for VOCA subgrantees to use a portion of their VOCA subaward to contract for specialized services. In the case where contract services are necessary, please contact our staff to ensure these activities are approved prior to requesting reimbursement. Subrecipients are prohibited from using a majority of VOCA funds for contracted services, which can contain administrative, overhead, and other indirect costs included in the hourly or daily rate. Prior to entering into contracts, subrecipients must obtain a minimum of 3 quotes for services, and this needs to be done yearly. These quotes must be available for GMU review if requested. Contracts, applicable licenses, and confidentiality documentation must be submitted to our office within 30 days of the contract start date. Some costs that can be covered under other are shelter costs, emergency client needs, or programmatic costs. And this is just an example of some things that would be listed underneath those particular types of services. I'll give you just a second to look over the slide. Gift cards. All gift cards, gas cards, vouchers, whatever, should have the following: a log of all cards purchased, how much the card is worth, the serial or tracking number of the card with the PIN number, when the card was purchased, what kind of card it is, retail, food, gas, etc., when it was issued to the client, a non-identifying number that ties the issuance to the client to maintain client confidentiality, but still identify that it is to a particular client, and then a receipt of the items purchased. So this is a new thing for this fiscal year. We need to do our very best effort to retain a receipt of the items purchased with the gift card from the client. I know this is new, and it's going to be a challenge for our subrecipients, but we do want you to try to make your very best effort to obtain a receipt from the client for the things that they purchased with the gift card. Mostly because gift cards cannot be used for fundraising activities, the purchase of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, lotto tickets, or perpetrator services. Gift cards should be for immediate emergent client needs only. Indirect costs are costs that facility and administrative expense that an organization incurs by undertaking a grant project that are not easily allocated to specific project costs and are not included as direct costs for the grant budget. Some examples of indirect costs are administrative, receptionist, office support staff or salaries, and/or fringe, membership fees like to the coalition, or other costs to run the program that cannot be directly tied to direct client services. These costs need to be documented on your budget narrative and allocated in your financial system. More detail regarding indirect costs can be found on our RFR training. Do we have any questions regarding the budget narrative categories? I think I saw a few pop up.
Yes, there's 2 questions. Would the signed attestation only be submitted once, and then an employee would not need to complete an activity-based time card on each submittal?
That is correct.
Okay. And then also, is there a template for the attestation?
We don't currently have a template. If there's a form that you would like to use, if you want to send that to us to review to make sure that that is allowable, we'd be happy to review it and let you know. But no, we don't currently have a template for the attestation.
And then if we have contracts with counselors, would that need to be recorded each year?
Yes. Yeah, because you need to make sure that the counselor fees are reasonable and prudent, and that you are not just continuing that relationship just because you've done it for a billion years. We want to make sure that you've received quotes or at least requesting quotes for services for contractors to make sure that things are being done correctly.
That's all the questions so far, Jean.
Okay.
I have another question, if that's okay, on the counselors.
Sure.
One, if their fee doesn't change, it's still required to get requotes every year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then sometimes with our victims, they stick with a counselor during their entire session, and that could be hard for them to switch counselors. Does that, I mean, does that take into effect? Maybe it's a question I need to ask separately, but I just figured I'd ask while I'm on.
If there's something specific to your organization, we can always ask that one-on-one. As far as, we don't, it's not a big deal if you continue to use the same counselors and the same contractors year after year. We just have to see quotes that you are actually receiving quotes and requesting them from other contractors, because that is a VOCA rule and a VOCA guideline. It is for every federal award. They just want to make sure that there's no nepotism or favoritism being showed, that if there is a counselor that is potentially better than the one that you're working with, that it maybe be cheaper or more expensive, but they offer better services. They want to make sure that you're doing things that are benefiting the client to the best of your ability.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
I want to remind everybody that this is just if you have a contracted counselor. If you have a counselor that's on as staff, you would not need to do that if they're hired as staff in your payroll. And then there was one more on this line, and this is true even if we're paying a negotiated discounted rate.
Yeah,
So
it's a federal rule. Yeah.
This is Christy. I just wanted to jump in here. I put that in there because we use the federal contract cap of 81.25 an hour for our contracted therapists, and we never exceed that. So we are paying less than the hourly rate to claim that difference for match. So okay. I just want to make sure even in that situation, we would need to get quotes each year.
Yeah, it is a requirement that we get the 3 quotes. It's something that we've never enforced in the past, but it is something that needs to be done. Anything else for anybody on these the budget narrative categories? All right. So some unallowable VOCA costs. Direct payments to any victim or dependent of a victim are not allowable, and supplanting existing resources for the same projects or activities are unallowable. The definition of supplanting from the DOJ is a state or unit of local government that reduces state or local funds for an activity specifically because federal funds are available or expected to be available to fund that same activity. When supplanting is not permitted, federal funds must be used to supplement existing state or local funds for program activities and may not replace state or local funds that have been appropriated or allocated for the same purpose. Additionally, federal funding may not replace state or local funding that is required by law. If a question of supplanting arises, the subrecipient will be required to substantiate that the reduction in non-federal resources occurred for reasons other than the receipt or expected receipt of federal funds. Other non-allowable VOCA costs are services to individuals who are not victims or dependents of victims, lobbying and administrative advocacy, perpetrator rehabilitation and counseling, prevention activities, needs assessments, surveys, evaluations, or studies, prosecution activities, fundraising, or grant writing activities are not allowable, property loss, most medical costs, relocation expenses, administrative staff expenses, excepting when administration provides direct client services as documented by the activity-based time card, development of policies, procedures, protocols, crime prevention, or any services to perpetrators. VOCA funding cannot be used for investigation of crime, collection of evidence to further the prosecution of crime, or for prevention activities of any sort. Are there any questions on disallowed costs?
I haven't seen any come through, Jean.
Okay, perfect. The last thing we're going to talk about are monitoring, oversight, and risk assessments. DCFS is federally mandated to provide oversight for your grant project, to complete risk assessments, and to perform on-site fiscal and program monitoring. More detailed information regarding risk assessments are included in the RFR training. The risk level has quite a few factors that are taken into consideration internally. It has absolutely nothing to do with our perception of the ability of your organization to perform its goals. Subrecipient monitoring. DCFS is required to monitor subrecipients based upon that risk level. We will either do a desk review or a virtual or physical site visit. Your agency will be notified what type and when this monitoring will occur and will be required to participate with the monitoring. More information on subrecipient monitoring can be found in our subrecipient monitoring training. Technical assistance and training are opportunities for DCFS, GMU, and subrecipients to connect and share additional guidance regarding to most any topic related to victim services. It is our goal at DCFS to provide the tools, direction, and guidance to help our subrecipients succeed with your awards so that you can focus on helping our victims succeed. Some important dates to consider, that your DUNS and SAM information needs to be active by July 1st, 2021 to receive any funding from federal sources. Completion and acceptance of your NOSA and GERS must be completed by July 1st, 2021. We are aware that some agencies have a little bit of difficulty and extra steps that need to be in place to fully sign and accept their NOSA and GERS. So as long as we have that started by July 1st, we can work with your agency to make sure that's completed in a timely manner. Your civil rights training is due by July 30th, 2021. Your civil rights questionnaire is due by July 30th, 2021. And you must register for the Nevada 211 complete by December 31st, 2021. The next couple slides are going to be resources for things that we've talked about in this training. So here's where you're going to get the 211 information, your civil rights training information, GSA rate, VOCA compensation if you need it, and then there's also a link to OVC TTAC website. They provide trainings on the federal level if you're interested. Are there any questions over anything that we've talked about today?
None have come through the chat yet, Jean.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for your time. We'll leave this open for a little bit. If you guys have any questions or have things that you want to talk about, we'll let you bring it up in the chat box. Otherwise, have a great day and we'll give you the rest of your day back.
One last chance to sign in if you didn't already.